It is the 31st of January 2021. Welcome to FIS One-on-One. My name is Swale Hamid Wengo, and I am your host. In today's session, we'll be able to look at the leadership and political crisis management in Africa, and specifically, we'll focus on the Ethiopia and Ugandan examples. Now, as we all know, the question of leadership in Africa and the question of peace and security has been key in terms of whether or not our leadership in Africa plays a key role in whether or not Africa has peace and security. And our focus will be specifically on the question of Ethiopia, taking into consideration what has been happening in Ethiopia and the recent situation in Uganda. And therefore, join me in this session where we'll be able to discuss with my invited guest today. You can be able to follow this session live on our Facebook page, which is Firdaus Integrated Services. And please feel free to pose your questions there. Then we'll be able to address those questions in the course of our discussion. Otherwise, at this moment, I would like to take this opportunity to go ahead and introduce our guest today, who is none other than Mr. Shoki Hayir. Mr. Shoki Hayir is an academic, political analyst, and social justice activist. He has a master's in European studies with a specialization in European politics and international relations from the Maastricht University in the Netherlands. He is the founder of GESCA, the Horn Center of Ideas, an academic platform that is based in the Netherlands. Shoki is also an external doctoral researcher at Radboud University, where he is affiliated at the Center for International Conflict Analysis and Management. Mr. Shoki Hayir, welcome to FIS One-on-One.
Thank you.
We are glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Yes. Now, going straight into our discussion for today, looking at specifically the question of Ethiopia at this moment. Kindly briefly address on us the situation in Ethiopia at the moment.
Yes, thank you, my brother. It's a pleasure for me to be a guest here today and to have hopefully a fruitful discussion on the ongoing issues in Ethiopia and Uganda. So what we see happening now in Ethiopia and the worsening situation is a reflection of a broader and unresolved debates about Ethiopia's transition and the federal arrangement. So this transition period started when Abiy Ahmed came to power in April 2018. So Abiy promised a new era, a new epoch, and a democratic reforms. So political prisoners were released, opposition parties were allowed to operate freely. But actually, little did we know that the situation in Ethiopia would deteriorate and cause a massive polarization and balkanization in Ethiopia, in particular the Tigray region in the northern parts of Ethiopia. And let me just remind our audience that Abiy Ahmed also won the Nobel Peace Prize for settling peace with Eritrea. But the issues that revolve around the internal issues were heavily contested. And this also started last year when elections have been postponed as a result of COVID-19. What happened was that the Tigray region refused to recognize Abiy's extended rule for 1 year. So what they did in the region, in the Tigray region, was that they went ahead and held the regional elections, but both results from the extension from Abiy's government, but also the results of a Tigray region. So both of these two groups did not recognize each other's results, and that is what we see part of the problems. Of course, there were a lot of protests with the Cairo movement based in Oromia region, complaining about problems regarding with extrajudicial killings, imprisonment of Oromo political leaders, lack of justice. So this is really a very big problem that was boiling down from the bottom when Abiy Ahmed came to power. And I think we will also talk about later on how Abiy Ahmed also approached this issues, and sometimes as experts call it, his extreme ambition, or a very simplistic vision for peace and unity in Ethiopia without a clear program that you can sell and convince to the fellow Ethiopian citizens. I think this is the result of what we are seeing the current situation in Ethiopia.
Okay. Now, focusing on the question of Eritrea and how the president was able to win the Nobel Peace Prize, and considering the very warm personal relationship between the two leaders, one would have expected Eritrea to be on the side of Ethiopia on this critical issue. The exercise of Ethiopia to who Eritrean government did not have any effect on this or any other regional diplomatic issue. So in what way this relationship between the two leaders has affected regional peace and security actually?
Yes, actually what happened was that when Abiy Ahmed came to power, I think his main mandate and his main priority was to stabilize the complaints and the issues that was going on internally. And what we see is that what happened was as reverse of his of Abiy's mandate. Abiy actually started to advocate for a regional integration, which he actually copied from as European integration. That's where his inspiration were coming from. So he initiated what we call the tripartite meetings, so between Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Somalia. So this also left Djibouti out of this rapprochement. So we know that since the 1990s, there were a lot of issues in Somalia. Somalia has been in civil war, and we have also seen that Ethiopia also went on a war with Eritrea. Eritrea also went a war with Djibouti. So Djibouti and Eritrea situation are not really good. So there are still ongoing border issues. So Abiy Ahmed did not really take into account all these realities that were that the region was facing, and this rapprochement left Djibouti out of the scope of this regional integration, and in the region we also have IGAD, Intergovernmental Authority for Development. What happened was that this tripartite meetings also weakened the position of IGAD, because Afewerki, the president of Eritrea, has also been opposing IGAD, and Eritrea also left out of this this regional organization. And to be honest, Afewerki saw this tripartite regional integration process or meetings as an advantage to elevate himself and leave out of what we call the isolationism that he has been for a while. So he has got new friends. So Somalia's President Farmajo was going to Asmara. Abiy Ahmed was going. So Afewerki started to move around. So he visited Mogadishu. He has been to Addis Ababa, and this block really was something good for Eritrea. We also see that Somalia also had a lot of internal problems, did not really try to solve that first internal issues before moving to this regional integration. So what we see is that when Ethiopian national army started the invasion in the Tigray region, that troops in Eritrea also, there are some speculations that Eritrean troops also were part of the conflict, of the ongoing war with TBLF. So this could also be seen as like, okay, I would start it here from Ethiopia, so you go from the other front, from Asmara, and then move it to the Tigray region. So this is what we are seeing, that African leaders are not really focusing on the internal issues that needs to be solved, the complaints that the different regional member states are presenting, arrangements for the new federalism. Abiy also tried to dismantle this whole federal system. So since 1995, Ethiopia is officially a federal government based on 9 ethnic regions, and it was ruled by EPADF, Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, led by TBLF, which is now fighting against the Ethiopian government. And so they were, so I could say they were the foundation of this federal system. So what Abiy Ahmed tried to do is that, or is trying to do is that, to dismantle this whole federal system and bring all power to his under his office, like centralizing political power, which would also jeopardize the federal arrangements that we discussed earlier on.
Now, on the same issue of the question of regional issues, Ethiopia used to be considered as a powerhouse that could play influential role in peace and security in the region and in Africa as a general. But with the current fragile internal situation, it is more of a concern to regional African peace and security than an asset. So in other words, how will this situation affect the region of Northeast Africa and Africa at large?
Yes, we know that Ethiopia is a very large country in the Horn of Africa, with a billion of population, is diverse in terms of culture, in terms of religion, in terms of language. And Ethiopia's instability poses both regional and international peace and security. We see that there are extremist groups operating in Somalia. Ethiopia is also contributing troops in the framework of AMISOM to keep peace in Somalia. So is also Uganda. So if Ethiopia is disintegrated, or if this balkanization in Ethiopia results in a civil war, this would be a very drastic situation, and will also deteriorate the situation of the whole region. We know that Ethiopia is also having issues with Egypt, with the issues of Nile, and how so this is also causing a lot of problems. So we see also nowadays in current situation that Ethiopia is also having problems with Sudan. So this would really escalate into a regional conflict that would cause a lot of instability, and also would jeopardize the security of 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 the international community. So you can think of security in the Middle East, so that the region could also be a safe haven for extremist groups in the Middle East, so they can easily come. So that we know that the Horn of Africa also lies a very important road, Indian Ocean, also the Gulf of Aden. So that's also a very important place where a lot of goods are also passed through the Gulf of Aden region, the European continent. So this really jeopardizes both regional and international security, and also the U.S. interest in the region.
Okay. Now, talking of the US, do you think their involvement as a mediator has created more harm than good?
Actually, what European Union has been doing for the couple of months is that they were trying to address the issue. They have also tried to freeze aid development to Ethiopia, but what we haven't seen a lot and heard a lot is that for instance the role of the United Nations. We have seen that that there's a massive catastrophe in terms of humanitarian intervention. There were no access to humanitarian aid, so access was denied. We've seen a lot of refugees in the border of Sudan. So a lot of actual intellectuals have been trying to woo or to try to convince the United Nations to evoke or involve in the situation using what we call a responsibility to protect, the RUP. So this would basically give a legitimation for a looser intervention of the situation in Ethiopia. So international community and the UN Security Council needs to have a resolution in order to invoke this responsibility to protect, so that we see that citizens, a lot of citizens died. They were extrajudicial killings in the region. So that but we don't know if we can if we can classify that there is a genocide or war crimes or crimes against humanity, but what we definitely see is an ethnic cleansing that the current government is trying to run after TBLF, which is a party from the Tigray region. So the international community cannot really rush. Of course, what they do is just that they are very hesitant to intervene in the first place and wait and see policy, how things would develop. But I don't think that as we speak now that that there is a chance of that the international community would intervene, except for imposing some sanctions, either visa restriction for people who are involved in this, or freezing aid, and etc.
Okay, now what about the African Union? Do you think they should have been able to be the one handling this before the involvement of the other parties?
Yes, African Union, a very, very good question. So we know that there was a campaign from the African Union saying that silencing the guns in Africa by 2020. So what we see now is the escalation of conflict is in the African continent. And to be honest, the headquarters of the African Union is Addis Ababa. So that's the home of Abiy Ahmed. So you cannot really stay someone's home and at the same time blame for what he is doing within his own territorial integrity. And what we see, and what also makes powerless when it comes to interventions from the African Union is that African Union is an intergovernmental organization, meaning that the member states has more power, so they have more power to say, so they decide what they want to do. Of course, there is the AU Commission, African Union Commission, but the power is very limited. So they have no proper mechanism to intervene. If of course they can intervene when there is a civil war, for instance, like the situation in Somalia, where there is both a political vacuum. So there is no proper functioning government. Like there are all these mini states, mini non state actors that are operating within the territory. So that's when African Union also asking for legitimation from the United Nations Security Council, a resolution that would allow African troops to intervene the internal affairs of the other state. But now we have the Ethiopian state led by Abiy Ahmed is intact, so it's operating, it's still there. So I think that there's a little chance that African Union can do, but this also has to do with the nature of the organization itself.
Okay, now finally on the question of Ethiopia, what are the recommendations that you would give on the steps to be taken by both parties to prevent escalation of the situation?
Yes, unfortunately, what we see is that the party EPRDF that ruled Ethiopia, led by TPLF, has been there for more than 20 years. We have seen the killing of CU Masfin in the mountains, the former Prime Minister of Ethiopia, who has served Ethiopian Minister of Foreign Affairs, but has also been an Ethiopian diplomat for more than 20 years. His life has been cut short in the mountains, and this is really unfortunate when we're talking about conflict mechanisms and conflict in general in the African continent. We have seen how Gaddafi has died. We have seen how Mubarak has died. We have seen the exile of Ben Ali of Tunisia. So it seems that African leaders do not have, will not have a proper retirement, you could say, right? So they either stay in power for like 20, 30 years, and then they die in a miserable way. So what we see now in Ethiopia is also part of that wider African, I would say, tragedy. It's really a tragedy to see that African leaders dying in such horrible way. Coming back to your question, so there is a need for a national dialogue in Ethiopia. So this national dialogue should also be be a genuine commitment from the government. So we have seen that that the Tigray region is now sovereign, and TBLF has said that they are committed to fight until they all die or killed. So in fact, what Abiy Ahmed has done when he came to power was that he has initiated a reconciliation commission. So this was really a very good thing. So he's first when he first came to power, so he initiated this reconciliation commission, so to study and recommend solutions. So this could be, I would say, as a good starting point, or like a place from which a dialogue can start, even though a lot of people can question the approach that they can take. So there are a lot of issues here. So this should also be inclusive. And again, there's also a question of how are we going to implement the outcome of this national dialogue, and who is going to implement. So it's just a question of wait and see.
Okay. Now let's move on to the question of Uganda,
Mhm.
and specifically, let's briefly address what exactly is the situation in Uganda.
Yes, the situation in Rwanda. So it's not same as Ethiopia. So there's a contested and contentious elections in Uganda. So in this month, in January, there were elections in which a lot of people were killed, and the principal opposition candidate, the most prominent being Bobby Wine, has been intimidated and also placed under house arrest. So this is what we are saying. This is what we are seeing in Uganda happening at the moment, and Bobby Wine and his team and also other opposition candidates are also contesting that the elections were rigged, and Museveni now declared that he is that he is re-elected for the sixth term in a row for 5 years. And remember that he's 76 years old. So this is also one of the problems that Africa has. So this is what we are seeing in Rwanda. We also see that armed forces are primarily loyal to the president than to the country, or keeping law and order. So like when we're talking about state government, so in the African context, we are talking about the individual leader.
Now, still talking about the forces, the Uganda People's Defense Forces and security as a whole. We have seen the use of force by them during the election periods. Do you think that the force they used, especially against the opposition, as regards to the focus on the most leading opposition, Bobby Wine, was proportionate?
No, I don't think so, because Bobby Wine, as Museveni and any other one who wants to compete for elections have the right to do so. So these are Ugandan citizens, so they have the right to run any office, whether it is the highest office, whether it's the municipality, regional. So the citizens have the right, and then the Ugandan forces has no right to use force whatsoever. So if they suspected that someone is inciting or like creating violence, of course there are ways to follow, so that you need to go to the court, get the permission of the court, should be taken to the court, or house arrest, or imprisonment. But this should be that the forces should follow the normal procedure. So what we see is that, as I said earlier on, that not only Uganda, but in general terms in the African continent, that we see a lot of tensions when elections are around, or when elections are taking place. So we know that the ruling party, the sitting president, always wants to be re-elected, and that there is a bigger chance that re-election would always, in most of the cases, would often come or occur in fraud elections, but also taking votes rigging the election. And we see that troops are also always sent to the most to the prominent opposition candidates, and what we see is that forces always use violence, extrajudicial killings, and this is unfortunately not a good thing. So the troops should be loyal to the government. They are there to keep law and order of the citizens, and they should not be loyal to the sitting president.
Okay, now talking about the question of election and the violence in terms of election. So it seems to be the mindset of the people to use violence during election periods, especially when their candidate does not emerge as the winner of the election. What is the appropriate way for the government to handle such a situation?
Yeah, good question. I'm really struggling to give a proper answer to this question because in the in the African politics, so we don't have this what we call the separation of powers. So we don't have an independent houses of parliament that make laws. We don't have independent judicial system that can prosecute or function properly, and we don't have a proper executive power. So that in the African context, politics means when we're talking about government, we are not talking about government in the African context. We are talking about an individual leader who is there for more than 20 years, more than 30 years. And then what happens is that they leave power, as I said earlier on, in a very unfortunate way, that they even cause or result that they will not have a proper retirement, that they can take rest and also address, give courses, talk to the next generation, talk about history, talk about their struggles. But what we see is that they die in a very horrible way, and there are plenty of examples there. And what we see is that government should be for the people, by the people, and what we see is that citizens do not exercise power. So you cannot openly advocate for Bobby Wine. So you should be caught and put behind the bars. What we also see is that in most of the cases that there are no free and fair elections. So that in the Ugandan case, we see that the votes has been counted live on TV. I've been seeing some scenarios which were circulated via social media about counting votes. We have seen that the mismanagement of numbers, who controls the broadcasting or the media. So it is the same. It is the same people who are in power. Very few people have everything in power, and they want to control the millions of people that are there. So we cannot really, unfortunately, talk about government that can handle all these issues, because they are the ones who are causing the problem.
Now, looking at the political situation in Uganda, do you think it has actually affected, or it's affecting the peace, security, and stability of the country and the region as a whole?
Yes, definitely, because Uganda also has neighboring countries. What we also see is that, of course, Bobby Wine and his colleagues and his staff do not have weapons, cannot go to the bush and fight. That was also what Museveni did before he came to power. So they cannot fight. So what they only have to do, and it's also not good that almost 40 years since the 1970s, 1980s, that we have seen a lot of resistance armies that were harbored by the neighboring countries that also fight against the government. That this is something. This should be something in the past. This is not something that we are seeing in 2021. So what we need to see is that there is a peaceful transition of power if elections take place. If opposition leaders win, there needs to be a peaceful transition of power from the sitting president. But unfortunately, that's not something we are seeing. Of course, we will see a lot of judicial killings, a lot of crack down of opposition leaders in Uganda. But we will not really see what we have seen in the 1970s, in the 1980s, when Museveni himself came to power in a form of resistance.
Okay, now on the same aspect of looking back at the history of 1970s and 1980s of Uganda, do you think the past leadership has had a contribution in the way things are going currently in Uganda?
Yes, because we see that Museveni has been in power for a long time now. So he has been in power for more than for more than 30 years now. In the early stages, in the early 1990s, but also mid 1990s, we have seen that the world, especially when Bill Clinton in 1998 traveled in Africa, he saw what he called a new generations of African leaders. So he did not really mention the names, but Museveni, of course, was also seen as a new generation of African leader, but also included Afewerki of Eritrea, Zenawi of Ethiopia, Paul Kagame of Rwanda. So the world thought at the time that okay, we are going to see that new generation of African leaders that are going to take a substantial reform. We have seen elections, of course, in the first years, they win. That's normal when they come to power. So we've seen multiple parties also contesting the elections. The elections also seem to be free and fair elections. So we've seen the continuous re-election of Museveni, Afewerki. We don't know whether he had ever held an election in Eritrea, but Ethiopia and Meles Zenawi, we've seen also elections, and they're winning the elections. And what we see is that that all these African leaders that were seen as a new generation of leaders who will bring peace, reform, prosperity. Now they are the ones who are causing the African the problem. So we see that what happened in Ethiopia with EPRDF led by TBLF, who came to power in 1991. After 20 years, we've seen that Abiy Ahmed came the same way to power, and now dismantled that whole EPRDF and then created his own political party. And we've also seen Museveni now having this election problems, and now Bobi Wine trying to come in and take power. So this is not something new in Rwandan politics. We have seen Idi Amin coming to power. We have also seen, if I'm not mistaken, Odoti was his name. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Odoti was also, president, prime minister. And then when he came to power after Idi Amin, we've seen the elections where there were a lot of problems in the election that resulted Museveni and also opposition leaders to go and start their resistance, national resistance army in Rwanda that eventually led Museveni to take power. So this is history repeating itself. Huh? Same in Ethiopia, same in Rwanda. And the big question arises is that, yeah, can we really trust any change? Anyone who says that he or she is going to bring change to the African politics, that they would be able, to follow an approach that creates consensus, that all the opposition leaders are on board to determine the future of their country. So this is really the big question that we are asking now in the academia. So can we really call all up? We have seen what Abiy Ahmed is doing. How, to what extent can we also trust Bobi Wine and his group and the other opposition leaders if they come to power? Should we also refer to them like a new generation of African leaders coming to power, and then if we see them staying in power for more than 20 years, and then so this is, we are really very skeptical and don't want to conclude a quick conclusion. So the policy is now wait and see. Don't want to disappoint the African new generation, the African continent. Of course, I am myself also advocate for change, but this really poses a lot of existential questions in regards to the future of the African continent, but also to the crisis that African to the crisis of leadership in the African continent.
Okay. Now, one thing that has been a contentious issue, especially in Ugandan context, is the question about civilian suspects being held in military custody or being brought before military courts. What is your view regarding that?
Yeah, very, very good question. And to be honest, what we see, this is just a normal scenario in Africa, right? In especially when there are elections. So what we see is that whoever tries to oppose the sitting president, those people should end up in behind the bars. So without the proper procedures in terms of what crimes they have committed, and whenever we see transition and reforms happening, that all those political prisoners will be released and the new ones would come into the prisoners, like what happened in Ethiopia now. So with this with Abiy's vision of transforming Ethiopia. So same thing goes for Ugandan context. So that it's really very difficult to give a straight answer to your question, because this is something we see across the African continent.
Okay. Now we have the situation of shutting down of internet and social media, especially in terms of during the election times, and actually most of the governments have been arguing it on the aspect of security reasons. Do you think the internet and the social media has its share of contribution in terms of the peace and security, not just in Uganda, but the African continent at large, especially in terms of elections?
Yes, we've seen with this development of social media, Facebook, Twitter, has also we've seen the emergence of what we call citizen journalism, so that individuals having their smartphone, filming, collecting information, and then disseminating information through social media. So that's also something we have seen in the northern parts of Africa during the Arab Spring in 2011. But what we see in the sub-Saharan Africa is less in terms of activism, citizen activism in social media, because the problem is that there is always a nationwide internet shutdown that also restricts the flow of information. So this goes both for Ugandan and Ethiopian context. So unfortunately, yeah, that people are not able to, of course, they film when this internet shutdown ends or restrictions are lifted. What we see is that we getting information, women beaten up in their houses, Bobby Wine put under house arrest. This is the only thing we were seeing, but this cannot really, yeah, there's no chance, especially for Uganda and Ethiopia. Ethiopia has been, there's been a lot of mass protests that were going on. But what we see is that, yeah, this also undermines the rights for the citizens to go out, protest, share information. So it's unfortunately less in Uganda, both and in Ethiopia, and especially in the sub-Saharan Africa.
Now, lastly, in regards to the Ugandan question, looking at the Ugandan youths, they are the greatest stakeholders in the road in which Uganda will take. Why do you think that is so?
Yeah, the citizens, right? The main problem with the African, yeah, with the African continent in general, is that the citizens has a less chance of succeeding to power unless they are the supporters of the sitting group. So what we see is that in the African context, that there's a lot of problem with what we call the institutionalization of political power. So that that power is concentrated in the hands of the individual leader and his followers. So there is no, of course, the citizens can go out, they can protest, but to be honest, there is a very little perspective that the citizens can bring change. Of course, they can bring change, but it's very difficult to predict now. So yeah, of course the citizens can protest, can go outside, but of, yeah, you also need to have a program. So look at now what happened in Ethiopia. So if you want to have, if you have a vision to transform your country, so you need to have a program that you can present to the people and sell to the people. So this is really a very big issue. So people going to the streets, yeah, of course, this can result change, but changes in Africa are also they also bring their own problems, and we cannot also predict the changes that are happening in the African continent. Who comes to power? What are their intentions? How long are they going to stay? Yeah, so unfortunately, it's still wait and see.
Okay. Now, looking at the Africa as a general, what is your take on the role of military deposing presidents across Africa? And is the military politically motivated?
Okay, just need to, because I have a lot of, I've written a lot of notes, so I just need to put them in the. So, as I said earlier on, what we see in the African continent is that the main problem lies with the institutionalization of political power. We've seen that Yoweri Museveni changed the term of election terms in Uganda. So he has also changed the age limit. In 2018, he has also changed the age limit because he's 76 now, the age limit for him to be re-elected. So we see that rulemakers, rules and regulations are under the president. And sometimes the rules are also and regulations are also used and misused. They are also made what we call tailored to fit. It's just like making your own coat so that it can only fit you. So that if, for instance, you as my brother want to contest or want to be elected in the elections, that it cannot fit you because this is something I have made it for myself so that nobody else can come and take it. So this is really the African problem. So that this also results what we call clientelistic politics. So that there are people who also take advantage of all this. So they are like in the underworld, unknown to the people, but they are also taking advantages of all these things that are happening in Uganda, for instance. What happens is also that there is what we call institutionalized political corruption. So this is really a very major problem. So that the corruption becomes a normal. So that rigging votes is a normal. So that the election commission is in favor of re-electing Museveni or whoever is in power in the African context, it becomes a normal. So that if you want to present as a candidate, so you also have to pay money. So so this has become a normal. So this is really institutionalized. So police taking money, bribery, but also embezzlement. So that money for the public are also being used for personal interest and for personal gains, and there are no control over that. So these are really the core issues that Africa is facing, that what the rest of the world sees something as a shame. So like you cannot really, of course, there are corruptions everywhere. We cannot deny it. In Europe, in the US, there are corruptions everywhere in this world. But what we see in Africa and what makes Africa special is that it's institutionalized, so that it has become normal. So you go to the police station and then they will ask you for money in front of everybody, everyone else, and then you have to pay it, and then you get what you want to get. So this is really a very major issue in Africa. I'll just share an example where I live now in the Netherlands. There are elections scheduled on 17th of March. The Dutch people are complaining, saying that elections the citizens are complaining, and they're asking the government to suspend the elections as a result of COVID. And the Minister of Interior is saying, no, this is stated in the Constitution, so we cannot break what is said in what is stated in the Constitution. So we will do everything we can to make this election smoothly, and also respecting the rules for COVID-19. So the government now saying we need to hold the elections, and people are saying please wait for a few months, so that of course we cannot really compare, and I'm not and don't really mean to compare, but what we see in Africa is the reverse, is the opposite. So that people, the African leaders, extending their mandate saying that the elections will be held next year, extension, 2 years extension, without any consensus from the parliament or whoever is in those houses of parliament. So this is actually the main problem in the African continent when it comes both to leadership crisis and also political crisis.
Okay, now what dispute resolution mechanism would you recommend for Africa as a continent?
Yeah, very, very good question. I think what's important is that that leaders need to separate their self-interest from the greater interest of the nation, because the nation is always greater than the individual who is in power. So Museveni has been there for a while. He will go anytime. So Zenawi, for instance, has been in power with Ethiopia and EPIDF. He's gone. We have, after 20 years, we have Abiy Ahmed now. He will go. So the African leaders need to convince themselves that they are here for a short period of time. Let it be 8 years, let it be 10 years, 15 years, that they should lead their countries to prosper, because Africa and African countries cannot wait for longer. Time is really running. As we said, it's 5 to 12. So we have seen that. I was listening to the news last night, and they were saying that the COVID-19 vaccinations will reach the African continent as last group. So like 23, 24 onwards. So we cannot wait. So we see that hunger is also a lot of problem in the African continent. So that leaders should think about how do we eradicate poverty, how do we enhance education. So when these people have something to eat, and do not worry about what they're going to eat tonight or tomorrow, and then do have a shelter, a place where they can sleep. And then the next step is to think about what to do. But the African problem is that they are trapped, both this transition problems historically, that would, that they cannot basically move forward. So this is really what African problems causing, but also the redefinition of power. So what is power? Who has that power? How do we consolidate power? To what extent does power play when it comes to rule making, regulations, relationship between state and society? So who mediates state and society? So what we see is that state is on the one side, citizens, society is asking for change on the other side, without power.
It's 11 hours.
So this is, I think, what an African continent can do in order, to open their eyes and see that we are in the 21st century, and that we really need to run before it's too late.
Okay, lastly, on our question is, how can we manage our politics and conflict in Africa to create developed continents?
Okay, when we're talking about politics in general, so politics is about the authoritative allocation of resources and values. So politics is all about how do you manage these scarce resources. So we know politics is all about resources. So what's missing in the African continent is that that in most of the cases, African leaders have failed to manage the expectation of the people in relation to these scarce resources that African countries have. So that, so for instance, you can think of millions of people are dying because of hunger. So they have nothing. So they live in a very horrible situation. So they live in slums. And you see very few people living in villas, making a lot of money out of this mess, out of this political mess. So if African leaders are very smart, of course, at the end of the day, you as an African leader, you will be able to get food, a place to live, so your salary is more than enough. So you don't need to appropriate and corrupt the whole system. So equal redistribution of these scarce resources is very important in the African continent. That would reduce conflict. I'm sure that you see African people, especially in the case I can talk about the that Somalian case, that people are talking about politics. The only woman, the child, the mother, the father, everyone is a politician. Why? Because of these scarce resources. So when is government manages to redistribute equally these scarce resources and values that would generate conflict, you will never see people talking about politics. You will only see people who are trained as a politicians, or people who have studied politics as a vocation, as like you have doctors, engineers. So politics is also as a vocation. So as specialization, something that people are those people who are going to engage in politics, rather than the normal people who has complaints and saying a lot of things about politics. Why are those people in the African continent doing? Because they do not get equal share in the redistribution of these scarce resources. So that is a very good mechanism when we're talking about conflict resolution and conflict mechanism in the African continent. So this is really a very important element. So when people have food on their table, this is the urgent question in international politics, in international affairs: food. So I'll give you a very good example. So Israel, a very small country in the Middle East. So most of Israel's territory is classified as arid, so 60%. So no rain, nothing. What happens is that it produces enough food to feed its own people, and the rest export it and make money. And what is it doing now? First country to fascinate all its citizens, even 16, 17 years old people who go to high school also get vaccines. So this should really, and it's within the Middle East and the Arab countries. So this is really, if you look in the African continent, so we say that we are rich in resources, we are rich in natural resources, but what's missing is that management. So how do you manage that everyone gets an equal amount of what we have, so that everyone can live, so that everyone can survive? So look at, for instance, the cacao industry. So Ghana and Ivory Coast combined, both of them combined make 60% of the cacao that comes to this world. So the Netherlands, a well-known country who makes chocolate out of those industries, what does it do? Take things for cheap, bring it here, industrialize it, make it nice, take it back to Africa, and then who can buy it? Only rich people. So that same element, that same material that farmers are producing returns to Africa as a luxury product. So only those with money can buy chocolate and eat it. So this is really a problem when it comes to international affairs. So Africa needs to have what we call the extractive capability. So means and the ability to extract from its given nature and develop it and then process it and then export it. So if we fail to do that in the 21st century, I'm afraid that we are not going, or we are not able then yeah, to be part of this competition, because we are not able to feed our own people.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shoki, for that wonderful remarks and wonderful presentation regarding our topic today. And I hope our viewers have been able to benefit. Any last remarks? Yes, Mr. Shoki. Any last remarks?
No, I've seen some comments. I've been going through the comments that were made.
Yeah. Yes, so looking at those comments, we have one, it says, it appears the African Union is not in charge in terms of assisting member countries resolving internal crisis. Why and what do you think African Union should do?
Yeah, I think I've said it earlier on that I think that the nature that the African Union is constructed as an organization also matters. So you have all these regional organizations. You have ASEAN in Asia. You also have European Union, but most of these organizations, I think we cannot compare European Union because of it is what we call the sui generis, or the unique nature on how it's constructed. But it does not have an element of supranational. For instance, that the African Commission has more power, or like can legitimate the use of force if a country is in problem. So the nature of the organization itself is a very problematic, because we know that that you have the United Nations Security Council, the 5B. So these are the most powerful nations in international affairs, and they are the ones who determine whether to intervene through legitimation of the Security Council, through using the United Nations Charter, but also other international norms and regimes, like responsibility to protect. And we know that they use and misuse this responsibility to protect. In the case of Libya is a good example. So I'm not advocating for those Western-based institutions. That's, I think, another debate for another time. But what we see with the African Union is that it does not have the mechanism, the power to deal with this. Even when they wanted to intervene in Somalia, in Amazon, through Amazon African Mission in Somalia, they do it through the United Nations Security Council. And we know that Russia, China, the US, France, and the UK, so their national interest prevails the interest of the rest of the world. So this is also politics that we need to deal with, unless we come up and have our own power.
Yes, another comment is, how true and sustainable is the argument from the leaders who have overstayed in power that they cannot find a credible leader to take over from them?
Absolutely false. Nothing can justify the true competence of the Ugandan and Ethiopian citizens. This is really, I would say, like unjustified argument. So that you cannot convince me that there is no leader better than Museveni. That is something I cannot believe. There are a lot of Ugandan citizens that are highly educated, employed overall the world, everywhere across the world, in Africa, in Europe, in America. So those people can take power. But unfortunately, what we see in African continent is that those who are in power, in most of the cases, do not have a clue about what they want to do. So this is just to make my answer short. this argument is baseless. There are a lot of competent leaders, both in Ethiopia and in Uganda and across the African continent, especially young people, highly educated, with PhDs, with masters. I think this should be given the platform and the chance to lead the African continent.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Shoki, for those wonderful remarks. At this moment, I will invite my colleague, Mr. Abdulkarim Aziz, who is the company's president and the director of studies, to give us his comments about the topic before we close this chapter.
Thank you so much, Mr. Swale. Thank you so much, Mr. Shoki Ayer, for these wonderful insights and your opinion about the African politics, especially with regards to Ethiopia and Uganda. My take is also in line with what our guest speaker have been saying for the past 1 hour. Ironically, in the case of Ethiopia, we have a very young man who is heading the state, and he has been a beneficiary of the Nobel Peace Prize. And so one would not expect someone of his caliber to fail to manage his internal crisis. And so that for me is, notwithstanding his credentials, is a challenge for someone who has been internationally recognized for bringing peace into his country, and then all around the peace has turned to serious conflict, where people are taking arms against their own government. Innocent people have been killed every day. And so I, as a person, I have challenges in understanding the way African leaders do think, especially when it comes to crisis management. I've said it in several fora where African leaders will not hesitate to exchange their natural resources for weapon and use the same weapon to kill or to suppress or oppress their own citizens. So that is a bit of a challenge with regards to what is happening in Ethiopia, especially having Ethiopia as the headquarters of African Union, where most of these African leaders do gather, and then they understand what is happening. So as far as Ethiopia is concerned, I'm sure Ethiopia has a lot of positive sides, especially financially in terms of the aircraft management. Ethiopia has been exceptional, followed by Rwanda and then few African countries having national carriers that can tour internationally. But notwithstanding, when there is no peace, a lot of investors will not come to the country, and the country will be losing a lot of resources. Regarding Uganda, I've been in Uganda, and so I know how the country is. Uganda is a very beautiful country. I've also been to Ethiopia. Uganda is a very beautiful country with leadership crisis. We have someone in power who has been there since 1986, who came into power to revolt against the sitting government. And so it's also an irony that someone who came into power complaining about the status quo, that the then government was not doing the right thing. And because of that popular sentiment, he was accepted by the generality of the people. And more than 30 years after, the same person has refused to go. The same person has started doing what he complained about. And so you begin to wonder what exactly is wrong with African leaders. Is it that, in the cultural world, there is what is called witchcraft? Is it that these African leaders have been, it might sound funny, but when you sit down, when you look at the the quality of human resources this continent is blessed with, the quality of natural resources, our sheer population. And then you can see that we're just too backward. The continent cannot even boast of one standard international clinic or hospital. It's a problem. It's really a problem. And so you find government oppressing people. I'm glad Mr. Shoki has addressed the issue of internet and the shutdown. How can you shut down the entire country? What is there? What are you hiding for the international community? What exactly is Uganda hiding from international community? Then you brutalize, you oppress your own people simply because you want to stay in power. My fear, and that's the question I actually wanted to take the brain of our guest speaker to, my fear is in Africa, we lack the leadership structure. We do not groom, and that explains why some leaders would think that without them, the country would not be. Because we do not groom leaders. We do not groom successors. So you find someone who has been in power for 30 years without a proper handing over mechanism. And you continue to amend the constitution, you continue at a will, you have corrupt parliamentarians that you can buy at a will, and then you bribe them, they adjust, they amend the constitution for you. And then you have the judiciary, who should be the last hope of common man, as we normally say it, saying that our hands are tied. Yeah, there are irregularities in the election, but they are not substantial enough. And so for how long are we going to continue with that lyrics that the election is not credible? We accept that, but they're not substantial enough. The moment the citizens are losing interest or confidence in the judicial system, then there will be a bigger problem. That will be too much for this continent to fix. We thank God that the coronavirus is the way it is. Imagine it is the opposite, that what is happening in Europe, in America, or in the US, in terms of the number, the casualty of coronavirus, is what is happening in Africa. The continent will be done by now because we do not have a plan. We do not have a roadmap. We do not have standard hospitals. We do not have standard educations. Even with the coronavirus, I don't know how many African universities shut down, completely shut down. They do not have the platform, the facilities to even move online in 2021 because we never planned for that. Like I said, you have corrupt leaders, you have corrupt politicians who are just thinking about themselves without thinking about others. And he has also said the retirement package. They do not have anything like that. And so this problem we're discussing today is a general problem. We're just using Ethiopia and Uganda as a case study. But it's a general problem. And so we need to wake up, especially the African youth, the African intellectuals. Most of us are running away from the country because the country is not conducive for intellectuals to stay. You disagree with the government, you've been arrested, you've been tortured. If you did not die, then you thank your God. And so most people are not interested to pay that kind of price anymore. Because once you're gone, then your family begin to suffer. And so people think it doesn't worth it anymore. So we need to find African way in fixing African problem. So the question I want to ask our invited guests, especially regarding the Uganda concept, what is his opinion? God forbid, but it's something that will happen to everyone. God forbid, if President Museveni drops dead today, what is going to happen to the country as a whole? That's the question I have for our invited guest.
Yeah. Okay, my brother, thank you. Very good question, and also in line with your comments, well placed about the problems, especially with what you said about things that we were not expecting from Ethiopia's prime minister, as being young, educated, etc. Okay, going back to your question on Uganda, the problem is that what I personally see is that history repeating itself. And why do I say that? Because we Africans seem really to think that, that we run after an individual. So that a person who wants to take the lead, who becomes the president or the prime minister, is the person whom we give to all our support. And you already mentioned with Museveni coming to power, just like that in Uganda in 1986. So what I am afraid now is that I don't really see, of course, I see that Bobby Wine has a political party, but what I sometimes miss from the African leaders, also in line with my earlier, I would say, little criticism about Abiy's approach, is that there were no clear plans, roadmap. So, okay, we will follow you as a leader, Bobby Wine or Abiy Ahmed, whoever wants to bring change in the African continent in their respective countries. But what do you have for us? So how are you going to bring change, to bring transformation, and take us away from this status quo? So I do believe that change came, but it does not came as individuals, but it comes as when you have a group of people. So my advice to Bobby Wine and also the other people who are also running for these contested elections, or fraud or rigged elections, whatever we can call it, is just not only come in front of media, talk, but also try to bring your program, present it to the people and sell it to the people. So this program should all not be based on what you want, but should be based on a clear vision about the future that you have, something that you envisage, that you have in mind. So ideas, change. So what Africa misses is that we don't see what's going to happen tomorrow and after tomorrow. So everyone is obsessed with now. So elections added, of course, people are complaining, people are being killed, but what is the next step? How are we going to manage this mess that we are in? So in case if, as my brother said, new leaders come to power, they need to be prepared. So I don't see that. I see very little about those preparations. So like having your programs written. Of course, Bobby Wine was a singer, so I don't know his knowledge about political processes and how international affairs work. And I'm not going to go deep into that, but at least even if you are a singer or a football player like George Weah, that's what we have seen, of course you can run for any office, but there are a lot of knowledgeable people, like my brother said, a lot of intellectuals, a lot of people who has studied international relations, international political economy, all those different vocations that you need. So hire them, those people. So give them the chance. Let them brainstorm with them how things would go, because history matters. When we're talking about politics, politics is history. And when we're talking about future, future is history, right? So you cannot really determine the future of your country unless you know what has happened in the past and then make sense of what is happening now. So Abiy Ahmed sees, for instance, the killing of Siyu Masfin, the foreign minister, 20 years. Am I going to end up in that way? I see Gaddafi being killed. I see Museveni came to power because of taking over of Amini and his successors. So this is the road that we have passed since independence, since 1960s. So what can we learn? What you see is that you go and bombard your own people. You go and bombard and kill your own people in the northern parts of Ethiopia. Exactly that's what Siad Barre did in the northern parts of Somalia, Somaliland. And that's exactly the discourses that we have in the Somali context. Just giving an example, as we speak now, because people will never forget. As a well-known author once said, that wars are fought twice. So one is in the battle, and one is in the and the second time in the memory. So we don't think about how people will memorize this horrific events that are happening in Rwanda and Ethiopia, and then they grow up, and then what you see is that you will have a politics of what we call antagonistic politics, so that everyone who comes to power is looking for revenge. Tigray's TPLF came to power because Derg was doing killings in their region. And then what happened is that after 30 years, Abiy Ahmed comes to power because Oromos were protesting, so that the people thought that there needs to be a change. So Abiy Ahmed is doing the same thing. He's going back by killing. Of course, people can go and complain about the transition process and the reforms that you are undertaking. And why? Because one, Museveni will not leave. Why will he not leave? Because the problem of Africa is that the successors of Museveni, just like Abiy, they are afraid of what we call that the government will run after them, so that they have already appropriated a lot of resources, a lot of money, let us say, then they will not be safe. And that forces them to stay in power. Not about, this is an excuse of saying that there are no leaders. It's not about that. The truth is that they are afraid of once they leave office, that they will be indicted for war crimes, confiscation of properties, this kind of things. And that's exactly what TPLF was running after, was running from, to say, because they thought that if they leave power, then Abiy Ahmed and his new parties will come and then run after Tigrays, and then confiscate all the properties that they have generated the last 20 years. Same for Museveni. There are a lot of people that live under Museveni. So this creates the cycle. So this is a problem. So this creates the cycle. So the cycle comes in, comes out, comes in, comes out. So what we need is to have someone who can ignore, who can just say, okay, I am here for a nationwide dialogue. I am here to create reconciliation. Paul Kagame is a very good example. So that, okay, those who have committed crimes, what do we do with it? Let us just sit down with them. Please forgive them. Let them leave their house. Let the government give them places where they can live. Do not confiscate, because if you do that, the cycle will come back again. So this is the only way out. So that we need a leaders who come to power, say, okay, this has happened in the past. We recognize these judicial killings, this massive bad things that you did, but now let us sit. We are not going to arrest you. Let us sit down, talk about what happened, ask the citizens, the people nationwide to forgive them and allocate them some money so that they can live, integrate them into reintegrate them into the society, so that they can have, if they had degrees, they can work at universities, they can work at different places, or do something else, so that the fear of others coming after you is very problematic in the African politics. Yes, my brother.
Yes. At this moment, I would like to invite my colleagues once again to give a vote of thanks, and then we'll be able to end the session. Yes, Mr. Dukaruma.
Yeah, thank you so much, the Director for Logistics and Operation, who also doubles as today's moderator. Thank you so much for asking our guests, our invited guest speaker, those pertinent questions that most of our followers have been dying to ask him. To our invited guest, Mr. Shoke Ayer, thank you so much for taking time to do this. Thank you so much for your insight. Thank you so much for advising us on what to do as a continent. Thank you for sharing your experience, your research. And then we hope that once we need you again, you will be glad to attend to us. And I also want to especially thank the leadership, especially Dr. Dutshi from the ON Institute for Peace and Development. We are working together as partners and collaborators to ensure that the peace of the continent of Africa is guaranteed. So we want to thank him so much for being part of this program. Similarly, I want to thank the Board of Directors of Redaus Integrated Services for approving this program so that a lot of people, especially the aspiring leaders in Africa, will understand the history, will understand the present, and then we can properly prepare for the future. Similarly, I want to thank my friend and my brother who joined all the way from Nigeria and Lagos. That's Mr. Ibrahim Abayomi Aziz. We are very sorry we could not address your question because of the time, but we can still do that by replying either personally or doing it on our website. He was asking questions about the role of youth in all of this. And so we're going to do that. Thank you so much for joining and tuning into those programs. To all our followers on Facebook, on YouTube, we want to thank you especially for attending today's session. And like we do, I'm sure you've not been disappointed. You've heard from the experts, you've heard his opinion, and that is what is actually happening in Ethiopia, in Uganda, and especially in Africa. So once again, on behalf of Redaus Integrated Services Limited, Mr. Shoke Ayer, we want to thank you so much for taking time, and I will wish you the best in your academic pursuit and then in your career as a political analyst and academia. Thank you so much and have a lovely day.
Many thanks, my brother. Same to you.
Okay, thank you all for joining us. You can be able to follow us from our Twitter handle at Firdaus Integral One, from our Facebook Firdaus Integrated Services, and from our Instagram at Firdaus_Integral One, and also we are able to be found on LinkedIn at Firdaus Integrated Services Limited, and on YouTube the same, Firdaus Integrated Services Limited. We have further programs that are coming up. Stay tuned, follow us on our social media, and we'll be able to update you. Thank you very much and have a lovely day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.